an example that is particular to the UK, but you may have heard of. So our former Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, who's now not the Foreign Secretary, but is positioning or jockeying to be something or the other in the nation. No one really knows what Boris thinks.
I think we all think he wants to be Prime Minister. But
So, formerly at Douglas's...
my first editor.
Yeah, magazine of repute. So Boris Johnson has said something. If I were sitting in front of you here today on this stage, wearing a full black burqa and a niqab covering my face veil, and the only thing you could see of me were my eyes, you probably wouldn't be too happy.
Unless you would transition to being a woman before.
I was about to say, not because, of course, most of you may want to see my face, but actually because when you communicate with somebody on stage, a large part of communication is facial expressions and body language. And if I'm concealing all of that from you, and the only thing you're hearing is a muffled voice coming through, behind a veil like this, then of course it interferes with the communication. Now, there's nothing controversial in what I've just said, at all, right? You probably want to see the person you're speaking to, but a word Eric used earlier, we're living in a gaslit world. So that phrase, gaslighting, when I'm telling you that what you know for a fact to be the reality isn't actually the reality, and instead I'm making you question your sanity because you're seeing the reality in a different way. And so I'm pretending that what you know to be true isn't actually true, you're just going a bit mad. We all know it's true that when you're talking to somebody, you want to see their face, their body language, and their facial expressions. We all know that intuitively. And so along comes Boris Johnson, and he says something frankly a bit, bombastic, using his typical bombastic style, and he compares women in face veils to what we say in England is letterboxes. I think the Americans call them mailboxes. I don't know what Australians refer to them as.
Well, now you put me on the spot. What do we call them?
Right? You know where you slide the letter into the slot?
Yeah, letterbox.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So he uses this phrase. Now, this is, keep in mind, somebody wants to be Prime Minister, certainly former Foreign Secretary, a senior politician in the country. And the backlash has been unbelievable, to the point where the head of the London Metropolitan Police, the largest police services in the UK, Cressida Dick, she referred the London Metropolitan Police to investigate as to whether this was a criminal offence.
Yeah.
And the incredibly scary news is that the London Metropolitan Police reported back to the head of their police force, Cressida Dick, and said, we've looked into this, and there's currently insufficient evidence to prosecute Boris Johnson for a criminal offence. The fact that it even came to that question is what
would the offence be, Majid?
Hate speech.
It would have been hate speech.
So Boris Johnson made a remark, off the cuff, on the cuff, basically said that women in burqas or niqabs were like letterboxes. I've used the term UFOs, unidentified female objects. If you were to say that out in public at a presentation, you might get some laughs, might get some guffaws, you might get some consternation, you might get some pullback, you might get a bunch of people say that was insensitive. But you know what? We have to be able to say our sentences. We have to be able to say our words. We have to be able to say what we want to say. Now, the consequences by saying that in this day and age, you know what? Yeah, you could get canceled. Your Twitter gets on fire. You're basically, the mob is out there, trying to cancel you, shut you down. You're hearing it from all sides. So the fact of the matter is, in England, and thank God the United States broke away from England, because they do have now hate speech laws on the books where the police will come, God forbid that there's some type of a situation going around you. Someone's getting murdered, someone's getting knifed, someone's getting beat up, a car's being stolen, someone's being raped. That the police will come, oh wait, we'll handle that later. Right now though, we got to speak about something. Did you actually call somebody a he when they were a she? Or did you actually call somebody a she when they were a he? Did you not tell them that singular person that was out there, that you should have called them a they, thou, or them? You know what, sir? We need to take you in for questioning because you've committed a hate crime. Oh, and step over that body, by the way. We'll worry about that later. This is much more important. That's the stupidity that is going on out on the other side of the pond. And when they were investigating the foreign secretary for saying this, on our side of the pond, we had President Trump saying all kinds of things. You may not have agreed with him. Maybe sometimes he went over the line. Maybe sometimes he was making a joke. Maybe whatever the reason was, you have to allow speech to be said until it comes to the point of where it's going to create violence or promotes violence. That's where your speech, for your freedom of speech ends. Anyways, let's get back to this. This was a conference that called the Day of Reckoning down in Australia. And it had Majid Nawaz, it had Douglas Murray, Eric and Brett Weinstein, a couple of others. And what we'd like to do is get back to that right now. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political perspective, my political prescription on what's happening when all these things collide, when these great minds like this come together, when you've got social media, entertainment, religion, philosophy, culture, politics, government, and they all collide. Let's get back to the discussion right now.
A debate at the East London Mosque about 5 years ago, which is widely regarded as being fairly radical in the UK. And it was on this, and the entire audience were niqabis and were wearing burqas. And I made the point quite often. I just didn't know who was speaking, and I thought it was quite a relevant point because like I don't know where who, we got somewhere. Yes, and I remember at one point one of the women pointed out that the reason why they did it is because there might be arousal in men, and the presenter very wisely said at one point, asked the important question, could a woman who wasn't wearing a burqa come to your house? And I would be able to take my burqa off. And they said, could Douglas come to your house? And I remember saying, I promise not to get aroused. And there was an audible inhalation of burqa in the room. Anyhow, but
very quickly to finish the point.
That was a great line by Douglas Murray, asking when he was basically talking about, if he would be able to come to a Muslim woman's house who's wearing a burqa, and she would take off her burqa to show Douglas his face. And anyways, I just want to go back over that because it is absolutely classic. And we did a video on that, so check that thing out. But here goes.
One point asked the important question, could a woman who wasn't wearing a burqa come to your house? And I would be able to take my burqa off. And they said, could Douglas come to your house? And I remember saying, I promise not to get aroused. And
aroused.
There was an audible inhalation of burqa. Anyhow,
very quickly to finish the point I was going to make.
An audible inhalation.
If Boris Johnson, the point I was going to simply say is if Boris Johnson isn't safe from that mob, right?
Yeah.
And this is a man who held high office in the country, and if the police are looking into whether that they should criminally prosecute somebody that was the foreign secretary of the country, just imagine if the average person wants to have a conversation about whether actually they think it's important to see somebody's face.
But it's also just bullshit, isn't it? I mean, it's a
all
false
BS.
claim being made by people that this is such an outrageous thing to say. It's deliberately, it's people practicing oversensitivity in order to win a different political point.
That's the gaslighting that's going on,
It is
right?
constructed as a threat, and that is important. It's not the content, it's not that it's true, it's that it will stick. And so I really want to get to the flip side of this, which is what do we do to break the back of this thing?
And by the way, Brent, let's just pause and let people know that you'll be able to ask questions in just a few minutes, all right? So we will be taking questions from the audience, so that I'll give you the final word on this particular session, Brent.
So what we're finding out, we're doing a note comparison up here, and we're finding out some important things. Typical to imagine, hey, if I'm barely able to say what needs to be said, what are people who are in a lesser position to say those same things facing when they do it? That there's this stigma that comes back. How do we engineer a reduction in the effectiveness of that stigma? Well, we also have another place where we can compare notes here. Everybody has seen Jordan Peterson having tripped over the idea of enforced monogamy with Nellie Bowles. But we have two other data points. Eric and I both talked to Nellie. She tried to get each of us to acknowledge that we were MRAs. I don't remember if I even knew what the term was, as Eric did not know, but the fact that she went through 3 members of the so-called IDW looking for somebody she could get to sign up for some position that would seem frightening, and finally landed on Jordan Peterson, who was maybe slightly less careful, tells you that this was not a journalist. This was somebody looking to establish a story that would stigmatize, in this case, Jordan, the whole IDW. So you're getting a peek into what the mechanism is and how it functions. Now, how would you fight something like that? You would, A, take people who are in the strongest position to say difficult things, and they can provide cover for people who are in a slightly less strong position. So what you want is for safety to spread, because ultimately what breaks the back of this thing is numbers. It's large numbers of people saying, that's bullshit, right? So if we can get there, it'll be a whole different landscape. Now, in terms of social media, we've got 2 things. We've got, or maybe it's 3. We've got the huge danger of getting sucked in, ruining your family vacation, losing your actual quality of life to this thing that can suck up all your time. You've got a very big liability in terms of social media being used. If somebody becomes truly dangerous to something powerful, then manipulating them through social media, in other words, creating phony outrage amongst a small number of accounts, can cause you to have your attention sucked into fighting something that isn't even real.
Twitter bots.
There is also a solution in social media to these problems. In other words, my experience of thinking I was safe enough to fight the phony equity coalition, discovering that in fact I wasn't anywhere near safe enough, absent the help of people who had a bigger following who could stamp out the fake narrative that I was a racist. So that kind of thing is the mechanism that we want to spread, which is to rescue honorable people from this phony outrage, from fake threats, stigma, all of these things, such that people in general can get back to a life where you are free to make a joke. And you are free to make a joke and discover, actually, that one's a little over the line. I regret it, but it's not like a revelation about some deep defect. So I would say, at some level, I think we're learning the rules of a brand new landscape, and those rules are bound to be more interesting than we think. But there's a lot to be worried about.
Jon Stewart used to say that when he would interview Hillary Clinton, after asking a question, you could see her brain buffering to try to figure out whether or not she was going to say something that could even remotely be interpreted as being as giving offense to anybody. And you're sort of terrifying me that maybe we're all going to become Hillary Clintons.
Well, what Brett was talking about there is absolutely so true. There is absolute strength in numbers. And when you do have people out there on social media, on Twitter, on Twitch, on Instagram, on TikTok, whatever that is, from the conservative side I'm speaking of, and through any other social media platforms that have a voice, and they're out there talking. That's why it's so great to have the people out there for Daily Wire. You've got Tucker Carlson, you've got, Matt Walsh, you've got, Michael Knowles, Candace Owen, you've got Dan Bongino, Joe Rogan. You've got so many out there, so many of them out there. Not only are they talking the talk, but they're walking the walk. And yes, have they said things that are going to get them, that people come after them from the left, the progressive, the mainstream media? Absolutely. But because they're the ones that are saying it, allows us to say that and to go ahead and speak our piece, our mind, so we get our words out there. And there's nothing absolutely wrong in that. And you should never be scared of speaking your mind if that's exactly the way you feel, even if it's something that I disagree with 100%. You should be able to speak it. We should be able to discuss it. It may be passionate, maybe get loud, maybe it gets bombastic, maybe we share some words. But at the very end, if that's a position that you hold, you know what? You hold that position, I hold my position. We agree to disagree. Maybe we can change our minds a little bit. Maybe we can meet in the middle. Who knows? But the final point where I think the moderator was there saying that they were saying that Hillary was sort of, her mind would sort of go into like, whatever it was that her mind goes into. And she was trying to think of something or words to say that wouldn't be bombastic or wouldn't be construed as, something that would be harmful or hurtful to anybody. Boy, did that brain fart occur in her in her place when she called half of America deplorables. So I don't know if her brain wasn't working then, or if her brain was working. She thought this is going to just be great. I'm going to use the word deplorables to talk about the people that love Trump. Boy, that come to bite her in the derriere. Might I add, her getting bit in the derriere was probably quite painful to the person who was doing the biting. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already and we've earned your subscription, you liked our content, please subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. You know what to do. Check out our video links that you'll see here and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.